The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Welcome in, everybody. It's time for Keefer and Kurre, our weekly delving into two brilliant minds, if a little off center. But anything you want to define, that's okay. Kip Keefer and Tony Kurre with you, and we've done a lot of things on this program over the months, but it occurred to me last night that we really haven't gotten into something that I am passionate about, and that is Hollywood and movies and stories and different films that have been significant to both of us. And I thought it would be fun to find out exactly what our top four of that category is, and always interested to hear what's happening in Tony Kurre's cranium, and I'm looking forward to seeing your top film choices.
No, this is a perfect topic for this time of year. First of all, because it is the holidays, and this is a time where we normally have a little extra time, and there are a lot of great movies on television right now, and basically most of those are obviously Christmas movies, but there are some other topical movies, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, some other movies that are kind of like holiday classics. But I do find myself watching more movies this time of the year than I do any other time of the year. And I will tell you this, and we used to have an ongoing joke when I was doing stuff on Jocks. I don't watch movies. It's not that I don't like movies. It's not that I'm not into the movie genres. I mean, I saw Goodfellas for the first time last year.
Wow.
I've never seen The Godfather. I've never seen The Godfather 2. I have not seen Star Wars. It's just, I just wasn't a big movie going kid, growing up. I was out in the yard and I played a lot and we didn't have a movie theater close to the house. And so I didn't watch a lot of movies growing up. And to this day, when I do go see a movie, it really affects me. I think the last time I always go see the Jurassic Park movies with my oldest son. It's kind of our thing. So we always go out whenever Jurassic Park comes out with a brand new movie, we go out and see that, or a Godzilla movie. But it's usually that summer blockbuster kind of thing that we don't have to think too much because guys don't want to do that in a movie theater. But yeah, so this has been very, very interesting for me to kind of go through 3 or 4 of my favorite movies that I could think of that really affect me.
Well, why don't you lead us off and tell us one of them on your list?
Well, and this is one that I'm looking forward to seeing every single year. It's one of the longest movies, and normally I'm good for about an hour and a half. I can't go over. I can't do I can't do Oliver Stone movies when they're 3 hours long. I did see the Oppenheimer movie. That was the last movie I probably saw, and it was a little too long for me. No matter how great it was, 3 hours is on the cusp of just about ready to scratch my eyeballs out. But The Sound of Music, and I can't believe I said, everyone that knows me knows that I have this huge love affair with Julie Andrews.
Julie Andrews, that's right.
And I'm not a musical kind of guy, but it's just as a feel-good movie. Every time I watch it, it makes me feel good. I love the music in it. I think Julie Andrews is smoking hot. I think the fact that she's going to become a nun and she ends up making out with some dude, I think is incredibly hot. I think it's just got a great story to it. Good prevails over evil. It's the holidays. It's just one of my favorite movies of all time. And I saw it for the first time maybe 10 years ago. People are like, "You've never seen The Sound of Movie?" I'm like, "Sound of Music?" I'm like, "No." And I watched it. And after I watched it, I was like, wow. So when people do say, have you ever seen Breakfast at Tiffany's or something like that? And then I end up seeing the movie. I'm like, wow, that's really good. They're like, no shit, dude. The movie's been out for 35, 40 years. What's wrong with you? So it's not that I don't want to see these movies. It's just that I've never really had the opportunity to do that. But Sound of Music, I think, is probably one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, the Von Trapp family, yes. With all the kids and the widower, Christopher Plummer, and Julie Andrews falls into his grasp.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a feel-good story, and the music is great. There are so many iconic songs from that. And you had confessed this before when we did our top women influencers of all time. Yes. Julie Andrews made your list. So anybody who listens to Keefer and Kurre already have had the revelation with Tony. Because I'll throw in, too, later in her life, She did the movie 10 with Dudley Moore, and she was probably in her mid-50s at the time and still just unbelievably attractive. And the character she plays and the way she carries herself, I can understand that little crush that you've got there because, I mean, you watch her roles in these movies and you just say to yourself, gosh, I wish there was a real woman out there like that.
No doubt. Mary Poppins had herself a nasty side. I like that. That she was also in, of course, Blake Edwards, her husband. She was in a movie called S.O.B. where she bared her top, which was unbelievable, which is a fantastic, one of my favorite paused moments in movie history. And of course, she was, I paused that a few times. She was also in a Burt Reynolds movie called The Man Who Loved Women. And it was a whole movie. It was after the Smokey and the Bandit days where he just could not stop falling in love with all these beautiful women. And she was actually his therapist. And there's a scene in that movie, if you ever get a chance to go check out the scene where she's actually sitting behind him as his therapist. She's got her legs crossed and there's a mirror on the floor. It's just fantastic. It's great.
Oh, boy.
It's great. It's great.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and lead off one of mine. And this is probably the most one that would be subject to some kind of scrutiny about my mental stability. But Tony, I can't get enough of the classic comedy movie Caddyshack. Caddyshack is one of my all-time favorite movies. It's a movie that I can watch 100 times over because you see something in that every time or pick up a line you didn't necessarily get. Because let me just give you the quick overview of Caddyshack. The idea was a love story between the character of the young man that plays the caddy, and I forgot his name now, but the reason I've forgotten his name is because he kind of becomes the secondary part of the story because the script that was prepared for that movie was completely just thrown out of the window as they started filming because they took over a country club. They rented it for the entire summer in Fort Lauderdale. And the convergence of crew and talent that they brought in for that movie took over the place. And it was a giant drunk fest, drug party, weed fest, orgy. The entire summer, these people, it was like Girls Gone Wild, but it was Hollywood and other fringe characters going wild. There is an unbelievable documentary that you can find on in YouTube where Harold Ramis, who we lost a couple of years ago, famous, of course, mostly for his role in Ghostbusters with Bill Murray. But Harold Ramis went on to become a comedy film producer, and that was his first movie that he was assigned to direct. And Harold Ramis says, within the first week, he said, I didn't know what I was doing, and I completely lost control of the situation. He said, because you think about it, Chevy Chase was the big star in the movie. Bill Murray was signed up to. He was involved. He had contractual obligations to be in another movie at the time. So they only had him for one day, 12 hours to come in and shoot his parts. And he was totally uncooperative. They didn't stick to the script. They kept ad-libbing and doing different things. You had Ted Knight, who was famous for the Mary Tyler Moore Show, who had never done comedy in his life, as Judge Smeals, which is one of the greatest characters ever created. I'll never forget the scene where he's telling the caddy, Danny, I've sentenced boys younger to you to the electric chair. Didn't want to do it. Felt like I owed it to them. I mean, there's just so many hilarious lines, but all of the different characters converging in that movie. And it was really topped off by the film debut of one Rodney Dangerfield. And Rodney Dangerfield plays a real estate magnate with all kinds of money who just looking for something to do. The Rodney Dangerfield scenes in that movie are hilarious because Harold Ramis says Rodney had no idea. He had never been in a movie. He didn't know how to walk in and take his mark. He moved around. He walked in circles. After we tried to do the very first take, one of his first scenes is when he shows up with a Japanese guy and they're supposed to play golf at this snooty country club, Bushwood, which they couldn't come up with a better name. that's not how we do things at Bushwood. But basically, he comes in that pro shop scene, and he's just a man on fire. And finally, after about 30 takes, Harold Ramis goes, "Okay, to hell with it. Just do your act." and that's how they handled Rodney the rest of the time. He was like 60 years old at the time. And Harold Ramis said he was the biggest nightmare to manage in that entire film, because he was with the young guys doing coke and drinking, whole bottles of whiskey, and he'd sleep till 4:00. They had to shoot like middle afternoon because everybody was too hungover. It was just an absolute catastrophe to put it together. And they kept sending these things out to Hollywood, and the executive producer would say, "Harold, this, you got to get back to the script." And they just finally gave up and just pieced together this movie. But it started off bad in the box office and just became a huge classic because Bill Murray and Chevy Chase hated each other at that time because Chevy Chase had left Saturday Night Live, which was probably the most successful show on television at that point. And Bill Murray had big resentment. So they didn't do any scenes together until Hollywood ordered them. "You got to shoot. We're going to get Bill Murray back in there for a couple hours, and you got to shoot something with him and Chevy Chase. They're the two biggest stars you have, and you don't have one scene with them."
Yeah. So
that whole scene where they're in the in Bill Murray's little cubby hole when Chevy Chase hits his golf ball in there, and they do the big Bob Marley joint and chug the giant bottle of wine. All of that is totally off the top of their heads. There was nothing written. The movie's an absolute classic if you like comedy and iconic people, because it's just so much fun to watch.
If you get a chance, and it came out, I think, in 1980, The Making of Caddyshack, go watch that documentary. And I know you've already talked about that a little bit. It is one of the most amazing things, how in the hell they pulled that movie off. It was just pure brilliancy based on everyone who, they talk about the definition of unity is when everyone does their part the best they can possibly do it. You put it together and you get yourself a great movie or a great act. Everybody just did what they did best. Rodney Dangerfield, again, you were just talking about, listen, just do your stand-up. Just do your stand-up. We'll use your bits and pieces. I would have not wanted to be on the editing room floor when they came that thing together, because the thing ended up, I think they ended up having like over 6 hours of film to fit inside in an hour and 45 minutes.
Unbelievable.
And it was fantastic. And you're spot on. That was my number 2 movie on my list.
Oh gosh.
It's one of those movies that every single time I watch it, I will go out of my way to make sure you watch it. It's just amazing too, because if you get a chance to see the unedited version, obviously get the version you've seen in the movie theater. It's so much better than the one you're going to see on TBS. Believe it or not, TBS can't show the entire movie. But yeah, fantastic. I'm going to go another movie along with that same line. And we were talking about movies that we wanted to watch with our sons. And I know that you have a couple of boys, they're a little older than mine, and movies that really affected us growing up. Airplane was one of those movies where it's Jaws was another one of those movies where, I've showed Jaws to my oldest son and he looks at it and he thinks it's an absolute joke. He's like, this is a joke. I mean, this is horrible. And I'm like, well, back in the 70s, it really was. But there was one movie and he may have said he loved the movie just because he knew how much it meant to me. Not only because I think artistically speaking, orchestrically speaking, it was just an excellent movie. Musically speaking, one of the greatest soundtracks that any movie ever came out with, but it was one of the funniest movies and had a lot of political overtures too, including Nazism and everything else, but the Blues Brothers. I absolutely love that. I remember watching it in the movie theater and seeing the car flying through the air at 3,000 feet. I'm like, what the hell is going on in this movie? Why is this happening? It was such a fantasy. But when you go back and watch that, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, John Landis obviously was the producer in that movie and executive director, Aretha Franklin, and then you talk about some of the rock and rollers, Steve Cropper, Lou Maroney, Matt Murphy was in it, Donald Dunn, Tom Malone, James Brown, Frank Oz was in that movie, Cab Calloway, which is just an absolute legend. Steve Lawrence. Do you remember Steve Lawrence?
I forgot about Steve Lawrence.
Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia was in that movie when they're in the sewer. Jeff Morse, Ray Charles, of course, owned the store. John Candy, who is one of my favorite celebrity and one of my favorite comedians of all time. Henry Gibson, another incredibly funny man. Stephen.
He played the Nazi captain.
Yes. Yeah. Stephen.
Of all people, Henry Gibson.
Stephen Bishop, who is one of my favorite singers of all time, was the Charlie Tripper. He was in it. John Goodman, Shaka Khan was in that movie.
Oh, my God.
Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens was in that movie. Tony Fleming was in it. Joe Morton. I mean, I'm just sitting there looking at all the people, and these are people that are just coming off the top of my. Cindy Fisher was in this movie. Deborah White. I mean, I just think about all the celebrities that were in that movie that had bit pieces. It was just absolutely amazing. And you know, if you go back and watch it now and watch it unedited, it is just such a fantastic. And the music in that movie is so flipping good. I mean,
I love the scene, Tony, when they evade the police and actually get to perform in that big hall in the middle of nowhere.
Oh man!
And when the Belushi Aykroyd number of "Sweet Home Chicago,"
it's one of
was just incredibly great.
One of my favorite songs of all time, Sweet Home. I sang that song at my wedding. I had a band called Dick's Hat Band, and I said, man, if you could do Sweet Home Chicago, I'd love to sing that song. That's one of my favorite all-time songs, and if you get it off the Blues Brother album, it's about 6.5 minutes long. It is just it's got everything in it, horns, guitar, singing. It's just a fantastic song. And to this day, Briefcase of Blues is one of my favorite albums of all time from the Blues Brothers. It was just a fantastic movie. And it's one of those movies too, that would be just a perfect, because, you know, they're trying to raise $50,000 for the orphanage.
Yes,
it would be a good
on a mission from God.
On a mission from God. And you will actually see that movie show up over the holidays, because it has kind of got a holiday overture to it. But the Blues Brothers, and it was one of those movies where my oldest son was actually like, "Wow, that was actually really, really funny." It was a great movie.
Great choice.
Yeah, great movie.
That's a great choice. I think too, we appreciate it so much more now, knowing that was just about the end for John Belushi.
Yeah.
And you talk about a showcase for a guy's talents. John Belushi was one of the most amazing performers, most multi-talented people maybe to ever grace the silver screen, and it's just such a terrible shame, because at such a young age we lost him, and how much more great work could he have had as he aged, and how many kind of roles could he have absolutely knocked out of the park. So that even makes me appreciate Blues Brothers even more.
No doubt.
So I'm gonna go to my third one, which a lot of people will tell you now that they have never seen this movie, but it's one of my all-time favorites, and I can always go back to watching it. It was made in the late 60s when things were pretty tumultuous. Everybody thinks that we live in such unique times where everything's upside down and a mess. Well, in the late 60s, things were upside down and kind of out of control as well. But the movie came out in 1967, and my first memory of it was the iconic movie poster with the lead character standing at the door frame, and just a woman's leg in a stocking was in the foreground. And of course, the movie was The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
The Graduate is another movie with unbelievable soundtrack, because Simon and Garfunkel, who were kind of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, not really well known at the time, were commissioned to do the soundtrack for the movie, and so many fantastic songs that accompany that movie going forward. And the theme of the course of the movie is Ben Braddock, the Dustin Hoffman character, who was supposed to be, according to the screenplay, Mike Nichols was commissioned to be the director of that movie, who was kind of unknown at the time, went on to produce other iconic films. But Mike Nichols, after looking at a whole series of all these Hollywood hunky, blonde, 6'4" prototype California, dream boys, said, I think we need to go a different direction with this movie. Let's get the antithesis of those guys, even though the script called for it. And they go out and find unknown 5'0" New York-based Dustin Hoffman to play that role. And it was just brilliant, because he was so amazing in that movie. as playing Ben Braddock, who had come back after going to school out east and being a marathon runner and an outstanding student. But he came home to California knowing he had to get a job, and he was totally disillusioned, didn't know what he wanted to do. And of course, everybody that hasn't seen the movie, I won't spoil the whole thing, but Anne Bancroft, who was in her 40s and really capable of looking pretty smoking hot, even in that at that age, basically seduces him and makes herself available for an affair. And even though the character doesn't really, he's really not down with the whole thing, just because he's bored and indifferent and rebellious, kind of adheres to that. And so they start meeting at a hotel like once a week. In the meantime, of course, he meets Catherine Ross. And Tony, you talk about a crush. You talk about Julie Andrews. Catherine Ross in that era is probably the most beautiful, most desirable woman to ever be on screen. Mm. She was just, you just looked at her. It was like she wasn't even from this earth. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is another movie that she played. Of course, Robert Redford's Etta Place, his girlfriend, and the scene with her and Paul Newman, where the raindrops are falling on my head scene, where they're just walking around with his bike and get chased by the bull. And but Catherine Ross also, it was just amazing. So Ben Braddock falls madly in love with her, and that causes some complications, of course. But I love the scenes and the cinematography when he goes just on a whim to Berkeley, where she's going to school. And do you remember the scene? And this is just filmmaking at its best. He gets there at like 6 o'clock in the morning. Nobody's around. He sits right on the commons in front of a couple of school buildings, like on a bench. And it's this aerial photography, which they must have shot from a helicopter or something. It's just him sitting there. There's no action. And they do kind of a slow time lapse where all of a sudden you see one or two people walking by with a book. He doesn't move. He's sitting in the exact same position with his hands folded on the bench, and it's a time lapse over about 3 or 4 hours, where by the time it gets to the end, there's people everywhere. I mean, it's just students walking and people moving around, and the way they shot that scene, and the scenes in his Alfa Romeo going back and forth the Golden Gate Bridge and driving up from LA with all the different songs, just amazing. And there's a short Simon and Garfunkel song in there called April Come She Will. Yeah. That's one of my all-time favorite songs. It's just a short, like 6-line song, but it's just, the movie to me is something that I loved every minute of it, and I could watch it over and over and over, because the whole theme, there's one scene that really gets me every time, when he's madly in love with the Catherine Ross character and has been banished, from even seeing her, and they take her away. He's sitting in his room, and they're playing that song I just mentioned, and he's just sitting at his desk, totally depressed. And as they play the song, they pan the camera back, and you see a pad of paper and a pen in his hand, and he's written her name over and over and over on this pad of paper, and it just affects me so much, because I have had moments exactly like that.
Great movie, great flick, no doubt. And a movie, believe it or not, I've never seen.
Oh, that's one. You've got to put that on your list, because you'll appreciate, as an artist, you'll appreciate so much just the way they shoot it. That for 1967, that movie was 30 years ahead of its time.
There's no doubt. And I've heard so much about it. And I will see, maybe I'll watch that over the holidays. So I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and our radio station was in Jeffersonville, Indiana, which was right across the river from Louisville. We were actually licensed Jeffersonville, Louisville. And this was 1985, 1986. And I was doing a morning radio, and then I ended up doing night radio. I was working 7 to midnight. And of course, anyone that knows that anyone's ever done, anyone that listened to this show that's ever done radio, and I know, Kip, you've done it extensively, knows that some of the callers you get on our radio program can be just downright scary and just kind of crazy. And so more so back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s than we have now, because people don't even answer the phones anymore. People don't. But we used to have the request line. We'd have, we had 741 rock, 741 roll. Our request lines were full all the time. If you had 6 request lines, 24 hours a day, the request lines would be just ringing. People would be calling the request lines, and they'd want to talk, and they'd bring up different stories and this, that, and the other. So I'm working one night where I'm actually talking to a young lady who lives in Floyd Knobs, Indiana, which is about 45 minutes away from where the studio was. And this woman used to call me every night around 11:30, and she would invite me over to her apartment after I got off the air. And of course, she sounded incredibly sexy on the phone. And my midnight guy would come in, and his name was Bruce Cherry. And he's like, dude, don't ever go see her, because if she sounds good on the phone, she's absolutely hideous. You never want to go meet. Well, first of all, what kind of good looking woman calls a disc jockey at 11:30 at night and invites a strange guy over to her apartment in Floyd Knobs, Indiana at 11:30? And of course, I'm young. And I said, I'm going to go for it. And Bruce said, obviously, you've not seen the movie. And I said, what movie? He said, the movie Play Misty for Me.
Yeah.
And I said, no. And he goes, dude, you got to watch Play Misty for Me just one time before you go see this woman. Of course, I didn't. I ended up going over to her apartment that night. I took a pizza with me. You always took a pizza when you went to meet a woman late at night, because if she wasn't what you thought she was going to look like, you act like you were a pizza delivery guy. And you're like, did you order a pizza? And then if she was ugly, you just walked away. And if she was good looking, say, yeah, I brought a pizza over so we could enjoy pizza together. Well,
good strategy.
I ended up meeting this woman, and it was the most bizarre thing. She had a 20-foot python around her neck, and she had 55 bowling balls. She was a professional bowler out of Floyd Knobs, Indiana, and she was in her mid-50s, and she had a python around her neck, and I ended up spending the evening there. Nothing happened, but it was one of the most amazing stories that I could ever share with you. But so I went and watched Play Misty for Me, and anyone knows about Dave Garver. He was a disc jockey. It was Clint Eastwood. It was his first movie, actually, that he ever produced and was an executive director on. Worked this radio station called KRML. It's a radio station I think it was Carmel by the Sea, California, out in the West Coast. And he was a nighttime guy, offering incorporating poetry into his program. And he was anyone that's ever been in radio when you were 16, 17, 18 years old, man, you had a little Dave Garver in your, and this woman who would call, and she was played by Jessica Walter. She actually got a Golden Globe nomination for her role in this particular movie. She would call him every night, and she would ask if he would play the Errol Garner Misty a song. It was a great jazz song, I think, from the mid-50s called Misty for Me. And she'd say, would you play Misty for me? And of course, he'd never play it. And then he started meeting her and playing her song. And of course, one thing led to another. He ends up hooking up with her. And then she absolutely stalks him for the rest of his life, to the point where she's trying to kill him. There is a very, very young and attractive woman named Donna Mills. Do you remember Donna Mills?
Oh,
yeah. She actually played Clint Eastwood's girlfriend in the movie. They had broken up, and then he reestablishes his relationship with her. There's a scene where they're bathing together, whatever. It was one of those, back in the 70s or 80s. It was shocking, if it was rated R, there was going to be nudity in it somewhere. But Donna Mills was in that particular movie. But it was critically acclaimed. A lot of people kind of put it on a B-list movie type of thing, but it did garner a couple of Golden Globe nominations. And of course, the best actress in a motion picture drama for Jessica Walter. But if you've ever want to go back to the old days of radio, go watch a movie called Play Misty for Me. It's incredibly seedy. It is short, but anyone that's ever worked in radio in any capacity will appreciate everything from start to finish about that particular movie, and it will scare the living hell out of you by the time you're done watching it. It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. That's a great choice. My second one is also kind of related to the industry we love. There's a movie that wasn't very commercially successful, but it's just one of the best character stories, because there are not one, not two, but three characters in the movie that I just absolutely love and totally identify with. The movie was called Broadcast News, and it was William Hurt and Holly Hunter and Brooks, Albert Brooks, were the three stars of the movie, and it was about this all their different characters, and they developed all three of them brilliantly. But of course, it was a sort of a love triangle kind of a movie where Holly Hunter is this eccentric, brilliant producer, behind the scenes person at a television network. Jack Nicholson is in the movie in a cameo role as the anchor for this network. And anyway, the story revolves around William Hurt's character, Tom Grunick, who is an up-and-coming sports personality at local stations. But Tom Grunick has these kind of rugged good looks, and women absolutely just throw themselves at him. But Tom has a problem. He's not the brightest bulb on the tree. He's just more of a charismatic guy, and he reads the news and reads sports. And he gets a gig, gets hired by the network, and they want Holly Hunter to kind of groom him to be, a next great on-air personality. And the characters are so amazing because Holly Hunter is such an accomplished, brilliant person, but is just a disaster in terms of her social life because she's just too wound and too intense. It's so indicative of so many of the women that I've fallen for. And you see a regular theme in my movies here. But she's exactly the prototype of who I always seem to get involved with. These unbelievable, complicated Rubik Cube human beings that you just can't solve. But so her character just appeals to me tremendously. And then Tom Grunick is the anchor man to be. Just a great character. Again, so totally comfortable on camera. If you put a microphone in front of him, he can do anything, has no absolutely hesitation to perform, but is not terribly bright. And then you got the Aaron Altman character played by Albert Brooks, who is a brilliant, just genius in just about everything he does. But he's like a reporter. He thinks he wants to be an anchorman because that's where the big money is in the big future. But Albert Brooks' character is fabulous. And he's best friends with Holly Hunter because they really have so many commonalities, but she's not attracted to him. She wants William Hurt's character like every other woman. And it creates this just fantastic kind of love triangle movie. And all three characters are just brilliant. And my favorite line, being a person that a lot of times finds myself in situations that I can identify with this. There's a scene in the movie where they're all at like a brunch at somebody's house on what's supposed to be a holiday, and breaking news hits where some Libyan pilot has fired on an American plane during those conflicts back in the day in the Middle East. And all of them are called back in from this party to do this special, half hour, breaking news special report. And the head executive of the network happens to be at the party. And Paul's there. He's going to assign all of the personnel for this story. And Paul decides that it's a great time to get Tom, the William Hurt character, on camera. And he makes the assignments, and he leaves Aaron Altman, the Albert Brooks character, off the lineup. And Holly Hunter is absolutely incensed and pulls him out into the garden at this guy's house and says, "Paul, you're making a mistake. Aaron is the guy he's an expert. He's been involved in the Middle East, and he's done this and he's done that." And Paul says, "Well, I don't agree because they don't think the Aaron character has much pizzazz, even though he's got so much substance." Anyway, he goes, "I just think Tom's ready for this." She goes, "You're wrong. He's not ready. He's not ready by a long shot. He's not the right choice." And Paul goes, "Well, so I'm absolutely wrong and you're absolutely right." And she won't say it, but she just nods her head. And he goes, "Okay, now follow me here." Because he says, "It must be nice to think you always know best, to always believe you're the smartest person in the room." And the camera zooms in on her, and she looks at him and thinks about it for a second. And she says, "No, it's awful."
Yeah.
She doesn't disagree, but it's not the greatest thing to be the smartest person in the room. And it's been a hard lesson for me sometimes, but I love the movie Broadcast News. It is such a great movie. And I promise you, if you watch it, you'll be glad you did.
That's fantastic. That is great. My last movie, and again, growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, I remember Saturday afternoons sitting in front of our TV. And of course, we only had 3 broadcast networks. We had ABC, CBS, and NBC. We didn't have Fox. I don't even think we had NPR or even public television at that point in time, maybe back in the late 60s. But we would watch black and whites. Black and white movies. Abbott and Costello's were on every Saturday. Martin and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis movies were on. And there were some of these unbelievable seedy black and white movies that would run all day on Saturday afternoons. There would be Sinbad movies. I don't know if you remember any of the Sinbad and the Seventh.
Yeah.
The Sinbad movies. There were Godzilla movies. And I mean, gosh, you look back on them now, and obviously it's just like unbelievably. There's no computer animation to them, but they just scared the hell out of us. But there was a movie on that came out in 1957. And when you came up with this idea, it was the first movie I had on my list because this movie to this day still affects me. Back in our days, the scariest thing on earth was quicksand. You remember we always talked about quicksand. Quicksand was always something that scared the hell out of everybody because it was something that you could not get out of, and there was quicksand. It seemed like in every movie, and if you fell into the quicksand, it was the worst way you could die. It sucks you in. You're going to drown a miserable death. It was just horrible. But I always remember quicksand. We even played games out in the backyard where we had quicksand pits where if you landed in the quicksand, you were automatically dead. So there was this movie about this island called Chemo. It was the prince of South Seas Island whose residents were suffering this plague, this epidemic. And this American doctor, who was played, his name was Terry Mason, the movie, arrives to the island on assignment to help conduct research and treat natives about affected with this particular plague. Well, they come to find out that this plague was being caused by the slight radiation burns and the result of the nuclear fallout caused by the drop in the atomic bomb in Bikini Atoll. And later, Terry and one of his cohorts would come across this gentleman whose name was Chemo, who was actually killed on this particular island from this particular plague. And they found a tree stump that was growing out of his grave. And after they inquire about how a stump could be growing out of the ground where obviously someone was born, they realized that this tree stump was actually alive and that it actually had a pulse. And the movie is called It Came from Hell. And that is just, yeah, from 1957. And so you have this plague, you have this tree stump that's actually got a pulse, and it actually comes to life. And in the middle of the night, when people will be sleeping, this tree stump, this actual tree, and if you pull it up, it came from hell. What they had to do to try to make this tree actually look somewhat human, and it would actually attack people. And it would take people in their sleep. It would scare them to the point where they would pass out, and then it would drop them. It would drop them in quicksand in the middle of the jungle. And it was called It Came from Hell. And to this day, that is still a movie that I remember watching that used to scare the hell out of me. As a matter of fact, I was watching Santa Claus Is Coming to Town just 2 nights ago, and the scene where the warlock is actually in the middle of wintertime and the trees start attacking Kris Kringle. When they hold on to that, still it still affects, it still traumatizes me. Whenever I see those trees grab Kris Kringle, I think of the movie It Came from Hell from 1957, how it affected my life as a little boy. But that'd have to be a movie that I just to this day still affects me.
It Came from Hell. Okay, one of yours has made the list that I have not come across. And I'm not sure that I really want to seek that one out because I have enough issues. So tree stumps that drag you into quicksand, not really very appealing at this stage. But that is a fascinating choice. My top movie of all time is not going to be that surprising. You mentioned it earlier, but I was just when it came out, was only like 11 years old. It came out in 72, I think. And we were on our way to West Virginia, my mother's native land, and stopped from going from Atlanta to up to West Virginia, stopped in Franklin, Kentucky for the night and needed something to do and drove down. It's the classic kind of Americana scene because Franklin, Kentucky in 1972 probably looked more like it was 1932, just your standard little downtown with one little tiny theater on the marquee. I'll never forget because I wasn't familiar with the movie. It had just come out, but it said Godfather. And she goes, well, I've been wanting to see that. Now, she's got me and my brother and my sister in tow, who are at that time 8 and 6, respectively, and me, the senior, at 11. But she decides, even though it's rated M, back then that was one of the ratings. It was rated M. There was one scene where breasts were bared, and there was plenty of violence. But The Godfather made such an impression on me because you can't captivate the attention of an 11-year-old without it being something totally compelling. And the movie ran, of course, almost 3 hours. Both my brother and my sister fell asleep, which was probably a good thing because that probably saved them great trauma later in their lives. But the characters, Tony, I can go back and watch. I mean, Marlon Brando, James Caan, Al Pacino, Robert Duvall. That was just the Corleone family. Those guys, all just unbelievable actors. I always forget the guy's name who played Fredo because he, of course, was the butt of all of the futility in the movie, and later became a key player in the sequels. Because Godfather 2 was a sequel, but it was the first time, I think, in movie history that the sequel was actually mostly a prequel to kind of tell you the story before The Godfather. So Godfather 2 is more heralded by critics than even the original. And both movies, you have to watch them as a set because you can't really appreciate the totality of the story. But it's just such a fabulous story of the American family unit and all of the, of course, with the mafia theme and all of the different things they have to do to deal with those situations. But in terms of just storylines and the monumental talent of the actors involved and all of the fringe players, the heads of the other 5 families, it is based loosely on the Bonanno crime family, who was one of the original 5 New York crime syndicate families. Once Lucky Luciano had put together a structure. The whole mafia story to me is one of the kind of offshoots of the American story that is fascinating because it's rooted in every kind of cultural thing that we embrace, family and religion, but it all goes sideways when you have these major empires of just trying to make do for your family, and it kind of gets out of control. But the storylines are brilliant, the performers are amazing, and it to this day there's no movie to me that compares than The Godfather and The Godfather 2, which, are 1 and 1A that you have to watch together to fully appreciate their impact and just the star power. So amazing that are involved in both.
Well, you have given me 2 movies I need to see over the holidays. Then I will go see, and I know people cannot believe that I haven't seen either one of those, but I have not. I've seen It Came from Hell, but I've seen Bolero with Bo Derek, but I have not seen The Godfather. So I will go see the movie.
Well, this is a useful enterprise then, because I'm telling you, if you have time, and I know you don't because you're the busiest man in show business, but if you have time, even if you have to watch them in pieces, watch The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, because the whole story it unfolds, and you have to make about a 5.5 hour commitment to watch both those movies, but it's well worth your time. And Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, James Caan, who we just lost recently, just incredible performers. And Robert Duvall, underappreciated. He plays the adopted son of the Corleones, of course. Just epic performers all on the same stage. Must see, absolutely.
I'll make sure I check it out. Must see also coming up on ABC 3340 this Saturday morning between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. Of course, we go 2-0 again in our picks. We're 14-5-1 in our picks, and we do a lot more than just picking ball games. And we took college football. The CFP, of course, is shaping up, and what a fantastic Alabama-Auburn finish. One for the books for sure. And, of course, the Michigan-Ohio State game was a great game as well, and we'll shake it all out coming up on Saturday morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock on ABC 3340. It's called The Starting Lineup with Keefer and Kurre. Come check us out again every Saturday morning right there on ABC 3340. And make sure you check out Kip Keefer Show, Need to Know, and, of course, the Keefer Kurre Show right here on the Tony Kurre Radio Network. Thank you, brother. We'll talk to you next week.
Tony, this was outstanding. I really enjoyed it.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.